There are moments in this sport that arrive quietly. No press conference fanfare, no television countdown clock, no dramatic music swelling beneath a prepared statement. The news simply lands, and then it sits there, heavy and permanent, asking you to reckon with what it means. The resignation of a commissioner always feels like that. It is, by its very nature, the closing of an era wearing a business suit. And when that closing happens against the backdrop of a league still finding its identity, still arguing over what it owes its players and what those players owe it in return, the silence afterward is not empty. It is loaded with unfinished business. Philippine basketball has known this particular silence before. It knew it in 1975, when the PBA became the second professional basketball league on earth, behind only the NBA, and the men who ran it understood, even then, that they were building something fragile and extraordinary at the same time. It knew it in 1994, when the Dream Team's gravitational pull had reached even the archipelago, transforming what had been a regional sport into something that felt, briefly, like a national religion. Commissioners come and commissioners go, and in the long catalogue of this sport's political upheavals, a resignation rarely tells you less than it actually reveals. Because the question is never simply who is leaving. The question, always, is what they are leaving behind. What is being left behind now is a governance structure mid-renovation. The Samahang Basketball ng Pilipinas has spent the better part of a decade wrestling with a fundamental tension that most basketball federations in Southeast Asia recognize but few have solved cleanly: the tension between domestic league priorities and the demands of fielding a competitive national program on the world stage. FIBA's updated regulations, the calendar wars, the turf battles between the PBA and the national team infrastructure, none of these are new problems. But they have sharpened considerably. And when a commissioner steps away from that particular set of problems, the circumstances of the exit matter enormously. A resignation under political pressure is not the same as a departure by choice, even when the language of the announcement struggles to draw a distinction between the two. The Federation now faces a leadership vacuum at arguably the worst possible moment. The FIBA Asia Cup qualifying windows are not sympathetic to institutional turbulence. Coaches preparing for international windows need organizational clarity. Player pool decisions, travel logistics, the delicate negotiations between club teams and federation officials over release schedules, all of these depend on someone sitting in that chair with enough authority and enough respect to make binding calls. Without that figure, the machinery does not stop, but it slows. And in competitive basketball, slow is a problem. History has a useful lesson here. When USA Basketball underwent its governance restructuring in the late 1990s, following the professional players' first formal involvement with the national team, following the Dream Team franchise's gradual dilution into mediocrity at the 2002 World Championships, the recovery required not just the right coach but the right administrator. Rod Thorne and then later Russ Granick helped stitch together the organizational scaffolding that eventually allowed Larry Brown, and then Mike Krzyzewski, to build something coherent. Personnel decisions in basketball are flashy. Administrative decisions are invisible until they aren't. The Philippines deserves leadership that understands both dimensions. The incoming figure, whoever ultimately fills this role, will inherit a program that has demonstrated it can compete at the highest levels of Asian basketball but has not yet proven it can sustain that competitiveness through transitions. That is the actual challenge. Not a single FIBA window, not a single qualifying run, but the long institutional work of creating a program that functions when the generation changes, when the star players age out, when the next Kai Sotto needs a structure sophisticated enough to support what he is. Which brings us, as it always does when you talk about this country's basketball future, to Kai Sotto. Understand what it meant, what it genuinely, historically meant, when a 7'3" Filipino center from 8 Neo de Manila entered the conversation about professional basketball at the highest international levels. There are precisely no antecedents for this. The Philippines has produced gifted guards, clever forwards, savvy veterans who knew how to play within their physical limitations and maximize every inch of competitive intelligence. But a center with that wingspan, with that length, operating at the rim with NBA-caliber footwork, that was not supposed to exist in this pipeline. And yet there was Sotto, arriving in the G.League Ignite program in 2021 the way rare players always arrive, quietly at first, then suddenly unmistakable. The G.League Ignite is itself an important piece of context. Conceived by the NBA as an alternative pathway for elite prospects who either weren't eligible for college basketball or who chose not to pursue it, the program placed Sotto alongside American prospects who were themselves considered top-tier developmental investments. The training environment was NBA caliber. The coaching staff was NBA connected. And Sotto, far from being a curiosity or a developmental project in the traditional sense, was a legitimate rotation piece, a center whose shot-blocking ability at that level was genuine, whose post footwork was already more advanced than most players his age anywhere in the world. He averaged modest numbers in his Ignite season. The raw counting statistics will not stun you. But basketball people do not evaluate 7-footers by their scoring averages in developmental leagues. They evaluate them by their movement patterns, by their verticality as a rim protector, by their ability to run the floor in transition, by their touch near the basket. And on each of those measures, Sotto passed. The 2022 draft came and went without his name being called, which is its own kind of data point. Not about his talent, but about the risk calculus that every franchise runs when considering a player whose final ceiling is genuinely uncertain. What happened next was more instructive than the draft outcome. Rather than disappear into the quiet disappointment that swallows so many undrafted prospects, Sotto signed with the Adelaide 36ers in Australia's NBL, one of the legitimate developmental leagues on Earth, a competition that has proven it can prepare players for NBA rotation roles in a way that very few non-American leagues can match. The NBL gave the world Ben Simmons and Thon Maker and R.J. Hampton. It is not a consolation prize. It is, for the right player at the right moment, a second act that can be more clarifying than a first one. In Adelaide, Sotto logged real minutes against genuine competition. Australian basketball crowds, who understand the game at a level that shames most casual observers, received him with a particular kind of appreciation they reserve for players who work hard on the less glamorous parts of the game. His defense improved. His conditioning improved. His feel for screen and roll coverage, the fundamental assignment that separates serviceable NBA bigs from redundant ones, became more sophisticated. By his second NBL season, there were stretches where Sotto looked like precisely what the most optimistic projections had suggested: a viable starting center for a team willing to build around his unique combination of size and mobility. His contract situation, threading through all of this, reflects the complicated economics of a player whose value is genuinely understood differently by different organizations. Professional basketball contracts for non-American players operating across multiple leagues simultaneously involve layers that rarely get discussed in mainstream coverage: federation obligations, release clauses for international windows, the baseline compensation structures that differ dramatically between the NBL and, say, European leagues, and the perpetual question of whether an NBA two-way deal represents an upgrade or a lateral move depending on what the offering team actually needs. What Sotto's ongoing contract situation reveals, at its core, is that no consensus has formed yet about what he is. And in basketball, the absence of consensus is both a warning and an opportunity. The warning is that teams are not yet willing to commit premium resources to a player whose NBA translation remains, in their estimation, an open question. The opportunity, and this is real, is that a player without a defined market ceiling has room to define it himself. Sotto is 23 years old. For a center, 23 is not particularly old. It is, in many cases, the beginning of the chapter where the physical investment of the early professional years starts to compound. Think about what centers with unusual physical profiles have done historically when they arrived in the NBA at 23 or 24 with a skill set that was incomplete but directionally correct. Marc Gasol was 24 when he began his NBA career and spent 3 seasons as a backup before becoming one of the 2 or 3 most complete two-way centers of his generation. Brook Lopez was 20 when he entered the league but didn't become the floor-spacing rim protector who transformed Milwaukee's defense until he was 30. Rudy Gobert was 21 as a rookie and required 4 full seasons before the league recognized what Utah had quietly understood for 2 of them. Development curves for centers are long, uneven, and frequently misleading in their early stages. Anyone writing Kai Sotto off based on draft position and early contract ambiguity is reading the wrong chapter. For Gilas Pilipinas, the implications of his ongoing professional trajectory extend beyond the individual. A healthy, developing Sotto anchored in the paint changes the tactical options available to whoever coaches the national program. FIBA Asia competition has grown considerably more sophisticated over the past decade. China's size advantage has been the defining structural reality of Asian basketball since Yao Ming made it impossible to ignore, but the national programs of Australia, Japan, and South Korea have all made significant investments in their systems that have rendered pure size less determinative than it once was. The Philippines, blessed with a population that genuinely loves this sport, has lacked the physical prototype at center that allows a national team to compete in the paint against the continent's best. Sotto is that prototype, when he is right, when he is available, and when the system around him is designed to maximize what he actually does rather than what a coach might wish a center could do. The psychological dimension of his journey deserves attention, because it is not separable from the tactical one. Playing basketball as a Filipino outside the Philippines, carrying the weight of an entire nation's hope for international relevance, representing a country's first genuine claim on the global basketball conversation at the highest physical dimension, that is not a light thing. The players who have handled similar weight best, and you can think here of Pau Gasol in Spain, of Dirk Nowitzki in Germany, of Yao Ming in China, all shared a psychological steadiness that did not come from indifference to the expectation but from a learned ability to operate alongside it rather than beneath it. Whether Sotto has fully developed that steadiness is something only those in his inner circle can honestly assess. What the public record shows is a player who has continued to show up, to compete, to improve, which is not nothing. It is, in fact, the prerequisite for everything else. Now turn your attention to Japan, and to Yuki Togashi, because this story belongs in the same conversation and will not be understood properly without it. What Japan accomplished at the 2023 FIBA World Cup was not a surprise to everyone. The national team program had been building, methodically, patiently, in the understated way that Japanese institutions tend to build things, for the better part of a decade. The B.League's formation in 2016 represented a genuine structural upgrade, consolidating what had been a fractured domestic landscape into something coherent enough to attract investment, develop talent, and eventually produce players capable of competing internationally. But understanding what Togashi specifically represents requires understanding the particular beauty and particular limitation of his game. He is not a physically imposing player. At roughly 5 feet 9 inches in a position that the modern NBA has largely reoriented around length and athleticism, Togashi competes in a style that has fewer and fewer templates at the highest level. His value is cognitive rather than athletic, a court vision that sees plays 2 and 3 passes ahead, a pace management that is genuinely rare, an ability to draw defenses out of their preferred positioning through decisions rather than explosiveness. Watching him run a pick and roll is like watching a chess player who has already seen 3 moves deep before the screen is set. The ball arrives where it was always going to arrive. It just arrives there through a path that the defense never fully anticipated. His contract situation, still unresolved, still hanging in the air with a particular suspense that only professional basketball negotiations can manufacture, is a reflection of the same tension Sotto faces from a different angle. Togashi is not being evaluated for his NBA potential. He is being evaluated for his fit within a specific organizational system, within a specific coaching philosophy, within the economic realities of a Japanese league still calibrating what it should pay its elite domestic players. The B.League's salary structures have evolved considerably, but they have not evolved uniformly, and a player of Togashi's profile, genuinely elite by domestic standards, genuinely useful by international ones, occupies an awkward market position. What his contract resolution means for the national team is straightforward. Stability breeds performance, and Togashi performing freely, without the cognitive overhead of an uncertain professional situation, is a meaningfully different proposition than Togashi performing under the ambient pressure of unresolved employment. Japan's national team is built, in significant part, around the things he does. Replacing his floor leadership is not simply a matter of finding another small, quick Japanese point guard. The specific combination of his timing, his comfort with specific sets, his chemistry with the bigs he operates beside, those are earned over seasons and cannot be replicated quickly. Whoever manages Japan's national team program understands that, which is why the contract situation carries weight beyond the individual. The broader Japanese basketball story is worth sitting with for a moment. The decision to integrate naturalized players, most notably Rui Hachimura and Josh Hawkinson, alongside domestic talent produced a team capable of competing with Australia and Finland on the same stage. Hachimura's development in Washington and Los Angeles gave Japan a player who can initiate offense against NBA-caliber defenders, a category of player that almost no national program outside the United States, Spain, and France could credibly claim. What FIBA has watched Japan build is a genuine hybrid model. International infrastructure, domestic intensity, a coaching philosophy that does not ask players to become something they aren't but rather design systems around what they actually are. It is elegant, and it is working. Togashi is the connective tissue of that model. His fingerprints are on Japan's best offensive possessions the way that a conductor's are on an orchestra's best movements, largely invisible to the casual observer, absolutely essential to anyone who knows what they're watching. Step back now. Step all the way back. What does this cluster of stories actually mean, Considered together, considered against the long arc of where this sport has traveled and where it is still clearly going. Basketball began, in the serious institutional sense, as an American export. James Naismith's peach baskets notwithstanding, the game's transformation from winter activity to global phenomenon was driven by American cultural influence. The Dream Team, the Jordan brand, the satellite television revolution that put NBA Finals games into living rooms from Manila to Tokyo to Ankara simultaneously. The colonization of the global imagination by American basketball was so complete that for a long stretch, the assumption held that the best basketball would always be American basketball, and that everyone else was simply playing catch-up on a ladder they couldn't see the top of. That assumption has been wrong for at least 20 years, but the institutions haven't fully adjusted to its wrongness. The NBA remains the undisputed highest level of competition on earth. But the infrastructure of international basketball, the national federations, the continental championships, the FIBA ecosystem, has developed genuine depth. Spain produced a generation of players who permanently altered how the world thinks about big man footwork and team passing. Greece gave us a performance at 2006 that demonstrated the collective could defeat the individual. Argentina gave us a style of basketball so meticulous and so beautiful that it looked, for 2 hours in Athens in 2004, like the future of the game. Asia is writing its own chapter now. It is writing it through Kai Sotto's 7'3" frame working the mid-post in Adelaide. It is writing it through Yuki Togashi's measured, surgical distribution in the B.League. It is writing it through the governance structures, imperfect, contested, sometimes frustrating in their human messiness, that are trying to create the conditions for something sustained rather than something merely episodic. The commissioner who stepped down was a person who occupied a role at the exact intersection of all of these forces. Basketball politics and basketball possibility, pressing against each other, requiring someone to hold the tension long enough to produce something more than noise. Whether that person succeeded, whether the terms of the departure were honorable or compromised or something in between, those are questions for the people closest to the situation to answer. What the broader basketball world can say is that the role matters. The infrastructure matters. The unglamorous work of running a federation matters as much as the glamorous work of playing inside one. Kai Sotto will turn 24 this year. Yuki Togashi will continue to run offenses with the quiet precision of someone who has studied the game at a level that most players in his position never reach. The Philippines and Japan and the rest of Asian basketball will continue to push, to invest, to occasionally stumble and eventually recover. The sports center of gravity has been moving east for a long time, and the movement has not stopped simply because some of the institutions that facilitate it are in the middle of a difficult transition. There is a photograph, not a famous one, not the kind that hangs in halls of fame, of the Philippine national team warming up before a FIBA window game in an empty arena, maybe 2 hours before the crowd arrives. The players are running drills, the coaches are marking up whiteboards, a ball boy is retrieving rebounds from the corner. It is an unremarkable scene on its surface. But it contains, if you have been watching this game long enough to understand what you're looking at, the entirety of what makes basketball worth caring about at this level. The preparation, the hope, the accumulated belief of a people that their sport can represent them on the largest stage the game offers. That photograph could have been taken in Manila or in Osaka or in any of a dozen cities where basketball has become something beyond recreation, something closer to identity. The commissioner who just resigned was part of the story of that photograph. So is Sotto. So is Togashi. And so, in ways we cannot fully map yet, will be whoever comes next. The sport does not wait. The calendar does not bend. The qualifying windows open, the rosters are set, the ball goes up, and somewhere in the arc of a jump shot or the geometry of a pass, the thing that was always being built becomes, briefly and beautifully, visible.